Hello and thank you for joining us today. You are listening to PeopleGoal's weekly webcast where we discuss the latest HR topics to help you thrive. My name is Maddie and I'm an HR growth analyst here at PeopleGoal, and I'm here with Nick and Chrissa, who are going to be joining us today. So if we could start with some quick introductions, that would be great.
So hi everyone, my name is Nick Ligonis and I'm the founder and CEO of PeopleGoal. We are excited to be kicking off this webcast series. This is the third one we're doing. So yeah, we have prepared a lot of interesting stuff for you today.
Hello, Maddie. I'm Chrissa. I'm an HR professional working for high-tech companies over the last years, and I'm very happy to join this webcast with you and Nick.
Okay, great. Let's get started. Our topic for today is going to be feedback. And just to give a little bit of context before we get into the main presentation, we were thinking about the slight contradiction that whilst performance feedback is one of the key drivers of organizational growth, it often does not motivate improvements amongst employees. So we are going to base this presentation on how to create a feedback culture that actually works. The structure of this webcast is going to look as follows. We will start with an introduction to feedback culture, move on to how to establish a feedback culture, before briefly discussing some challenges when giving feedback remotely, 3 approaches to feedback, and rounding up with some key takeaways summarizing what we have talked about in this presentation. So let's start with an introduction to performance feedback. Giving feedback on employee performance, as we all know, is one of the key elements of supervision and coaching, and it forms an integral part of employee growth and development within an organization. However, good feedback needs to consist of a mixture of both positive and constructive comments. It's all very well giving an employee recognition, but with just positive recognition, they won't reach their full potential. So it's also really important to be constructive at the same time. This being said, and whilst we're all aware of the importance of feedback, there has been recent knowledge of the fact that performance feedback discussions can also have counterproductive effects on employees if they're not implemented correctly. For example, employees could start lowering their goals or reducing commitment to their roles. So it's really important to do the feedback process correctly, and we're going to suggest implementing a culture of feedback to counteract this counterproductive effect on employees. And finally, another recent trend that we've seen across performance management is that we are starting to move away from annual performance reviews and annual feedback conversations to a more frequent and informal continuous feedback model, which has been really interesting, and we will talk about this later in our presentation.
Great. So we can start by discussing the components of a feedback culture. A feedback culture is an environment where employees feel comfortable giving and receiving feedback openly and are actively encouraged to give each other positive and constructive feedback on a regular basis. For a feedback culture to be created, we need the following components in place. The feedback should be continuous, it should be transparent, immediate, and addressed in the whole organization. So let's start explaining what we mean by continuous. We need to shorten the feedback loop. Have frequent and informal feedback will help employees understand better their current situation and the current performance and make improvements. In addition, it has to be timely. It is a now or never situation, and since feedback is very important for learning, it is an opportunity to give the employee an understanding of what he or she can further improve. It has to be prompt, kind, and specific, and give the opportunity to reflect before taking any action and adjusting our work. It also has to be transparent, because if we have a transparent feedback mechanism, we can build trust between the employee, the manager, and the organization, And that way we can further boost engagement and lead to higher levels of performance. Finally, it should be organizational wide, and feedback should not be restricted only between the manager and employees, the direct reports. It should be also around peer-to-peer feedback and bottom-up. So employees should also have the chance to give their feedback, and they should also receive a holistic feedback from their peer network.
Yeah, that's the last point is very interesting one, Hrisa, because a lot of organizations tend to do bottom down. So basically, or top down to be specific. So it's just the managers that give feedback to employees, and like managers don't get feedback about the way they're managing their team. So it is very important, like, to adopt peer feedback and also giving feedback to managers and how they can help and like comment on their ability to help employees develop and improve performance. And then the other very interesting part in this slide is the continuous feedback. So feedback needs to be very frequent. So having frequent feedback has a couple of benefits. One being that employees, managers, and the whole organization teams will get will adapt easily the feedback culture rather than having it once a year, which is like a one-off exercise. And then also you can revisit previous monthly feedback or previous quarterly feedback and see whether like someone is improving based on the feedback given, because you might have like feedback that's not useful for the employee. If you're doing continuous feedback on the next cycle, you will be able to see whether you had an impact on improving or developing someone based on the feedback you provided.
Absolutely, and I think here, although it's very easy to put it into 4 pillars on a slide like this, it is something that is going to have to be an ongoing commitment from the organisation, in the sense that feedback culture can't be built overnight. It is something that is going to take time and commitment from all levels of the organisation, from employees to leaders. But by bearing in mind these key pillars of it being continuous, immediate, and transparent, and throughout the organisation, there is potential to have a really successful feedback culture, which ultimately is going to strengthen the organisational culture as a whole.
So pretty much I think we have already set out some of the benefits, but in order to have them in a framework, we can see how a feedback culture can actually benefit the employee, the team, and the organization. So for the employee, it can accelerate the personal and professional growth. It can elevate their performance. They are given the chance to develop new skills that they have not discovered yet, and they may need to develop in order to excel in their work, and also leads to higher productivity. For teams, it definitely improves team communication. It improves the working relationships between the team members, and it can reduce conflict due to the frequent, open, and honest communication that exists. For the organizations, it increases motivation and engagement, which are very important elements and that you need to have in order to be productive. It also reduces employee turnover and absenteeism. It improves leadership effectiveness, and as a bottom line, it further increases profitability. So these are the benefits that we need to realize, and this should be the actual benefits that all organizations in the contemporary working environment should enjoy. And the only thing they need to do is to consider how they can build a feedback culture.
Yeah, this is a good slide, because it's good to put the benefits like this for employees, teams, and organizations. Because from my experience and having talked to many HR directors, I do get as feedback that sometimes employees, managers are not open to feedback, or they think that feedback is the time when you say something bad to someone, or you're trying to make someone look not good at their job. But like, this is completely wrong perspective. So I think this slide is great to have it available and sharing it with your team, with your employees, with managers, so they could see like what you could get out from the feedback process. It's not like an exercise just to tell you where you are wrong.
Yes, and it's not only about the employee, it's about the team and the organization as well. So each party can see the benefits from the feedback culture.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's often difficult to convince top management why feedback and being close to teams and employees is very important and critical for the business success.
Absolutely.
We have discussed about the feedback culture, we have discussed about the benefits, and now we will see how you can actually provide feedback within an organization. We have these 6 fundamental methods. The first one being the one-on-one check-ins between the manager and the employee. The second one being group retrospectives, where teams can gather together and discuss elements of the project and share the feedbacks on areas that they may need to improve or the strength areas. The office hour drop-ins, where there is some time, budgeted time for employees to have short discussions with their managers, informal discussions. The feedback, which is a sort of a gamification feedback method, where you actually have a specific time frame, having one-to-one session with a peer or a manager, but at the same time, other peers or employees have the same type of sessions. The 360-degree feedback, which is a very well-known feedback process where you actually receive a holistic understanding of how other people see an individual, both managers, direct reports, peers, and even external stakeholders. And finally, feedback surveys, a more formal way that can help an organization define and pinpoint areas of trouble or areas of strength and take corrective action.
So I think here, whilst it might seem at face value to employees quite overwhelming to have this amount of different feedback methods, we really think that the more feedback methods you can do, the better. The more that employees get accustomed and managers get accustomed to giving and receiving feedback, the more natural it will become, and you will get one step closer to achieving this feedback culture that we've been talking about. And it will also help employees and managers tap into a growth mindset, where just if they're hitting their targets, that's not all. It's really about being in a mindset of growth and always looking for methods and ways to improve. And one of the best ways to do that is having a continuous feedback process by using many different options like we've discussed here.
So finally, how we can establish a feedback culture. These are the steps that we need to follow in order to set a culture of feedback. So the first step is that we should work both top-down and bottom-up. This means that employees should also have their voice and their say during the feedback loop. The second step is to provide feedback training to managers and employees so they understand what feedback is all around. Feedback is a positive element in any organization, and should not be considered as a moment of a moment where we discussed what went wrong only, but something that we need to consider as a learning and development opportunity. The third step is to give good feedback, to ask for permission, to share observations, explain impact, wait and listen, and suggest a solution. The fourth step is to schedule regular feedback meetings. As we also said before, feedback must be timely and should be continuous. Step 5, feedback conversations should be collaborative. And this is very relevant to step 2. So we need to train people, conduct collaborative feedback. And step 6, feedback should be future focused instead of assessing past performance. So we should look ahead of us instead of discussing what went wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And also step 5 is very important. So it should be a dialogue and a two-way discussion as well. Because sometimes like you give feedback to someone and it sounds like you're not open on hearing back. So I think it would work both ways, from the manager and the employee, and the employee and the manager, and peer to peer. So it has to be a dialogue as well. Also, when you're giving feedback, you have always to be open and hear the other side, because your perspective from where you stand might be different from someone else's perspective, with someone else's perspective from where they stand. So I think the collaboration is a very critical on establishing, like promoting that feedback needs to be collaborative when you're setting up your feedback culture.
Absolutely, Nick. And I would also like to add a few points onto what we mean by future-focused feedback and the reasons for doing this. So when we think about the past, people tend to think about how things beyond their control might have made their performance better, for example, resources or their responsibilities. Whereas when people are thinking about their performance in the future, people focus more on features which are under their control. For example, making actions or taking responsibility or putting more effort into their tasks. So what we're saying here is that whereas it's important to assess past performance, feedback conversations now should really be looking towards the future, as what this will do is encourage employees to take more responsibility, to initiate actions and engage in effortful decisions that will help them to achieve their goals.
Great. And now, yeah, we prepared this slide on the challenges someone may face when trying to give or get feedback remotely. The first one we have here is lack of face-to-face communication. So obviously, with everyone working remotely, you can't see or you can take someone out for a coffee and give your feedback, or if you want to have like a follow-up meeting for the feedback cannot be face-to-face, it will have to be remotely. I think in that case, if you do if you give remote feedback and then you want to have a discussion, it's always best to do it with your camera on, so you could see the other side. The same goes for the person who's getting the feedback and the person who gives the feedback. So you could see facial expressions, and I think that is the best way to bring it close to being a face-to-face communication. I think the other point we have here is employees. They've been impacted from the pandemic, so managers do not give like negative feedback, or do not like set a full picture when it comes to feedback. Same goes with the peers. Peers may get a direction to be softer with the feedback. I would say like this is a mistake. I think the feedback should be given, and like both the peers or the managers should provide like a fair feedback to someone, especially when it has to do with completing tasks or when it's associated with performance, because when you give feedback, you give an opportunity also to someone to work on some areas they have to develop. Also, currently with the pandemic, you have some people that working from office, some people that working from home, and that could complicate the performance feedback process, because it's you're assessing in a different way. When you're going in the office and you work with someone, even during the pandemic, it's different when you have to work with someone who's working remotely. So the feedback could vary, and you could argue that the assessment might not be equal. To tackle that, I think it's best always to take like a very objective view and try to assess on specific facts rather than if someone is in the office versus someone who's not in the office. And then I think like another point on the feedback and gathering feedback or receiving feedback with the pandemic is, I think, like a lot of organizations have put that on the back burner. So they're not doing, they're not giving feedback. They're focusing obviously on other parts, which is replanning or setting new goals, and that makes sense. But I think as we approach the end of the year, I think feedback and working remotely and achieving goals remotely should be measured, and the feedback discussion should include these topics.
Definitely agree with you, Nick. And as remote working becomes the new normal, establishing a feedback culture is more important than ever. And for companies that they didn't have a feedback mechanism in the past before the pandemic, it is very difficult to cope and streamline and bring back the communication that is lost. So it is time to incorporate feedback in the organization in order to be able to cope better with the remote working environment that we are all facing. And this is something that is here and definitely will stay. The remote working. So organizations must be better prepared to tackle any issues that come from communication, employee communication through a feedback culture.
Absolutely, Carissa. And also, as we touched on before, making sure that these feedback conversations are very future focused will help deal with some of these challenges. For example, managers not wanting to give feedback as it's difficult for employees. If you're using this process as very much a future process, is looking to improve, adapt, and grow, then that shouldn't be a problem, as employees should be very receptive to this feedback. And also touching on, as Chris has said, remote work is here to stay. So it's almost, we can't now be looking at that, whilst it is a challenge, as something that's going to hold us back, as we need to adapt our methods in regard to feedback to suit the remote environment. So that is something that can definitely be worked on by creating a feedback culture, as we've discussed.
Great, and the next slide is on the 3 approaches to feedback. So basically here we have qualitative feedback, quantitative feedback, and the combination of 2, or a hybrid model. The qualitative, to run like a qualitative feedback process is very easy. You can have like a set of questions which are open questions, no scores, no rankings. We found like this works quite a lot with a lot of organizations, especially with organizations that do very frequent feedback. One very common method is the start, stop, continue peer and manager feedback. So which assesses basically on a loop. So what you should start doing, what you should stop doing, and what you should be continue doing. So this basically gives an opportunity to the person who provides feedback to highlight some areas where the feedback recipients should stop doing or improve. And then also you could include self-evaluation, and parts of qualitative feedback can be included on the performance review as well. The quantitative feedback is well used as well from many organizations, especially especially with organizations that they work a lot with. They are like sales driven, or like it's easy to quantify, very easy to quantify the work output, or even with teams that easily to quantify the worked output. So you could have an organization that uses 2 different types of feedback depending on the team or the department. So typically what we have here is like we have self-assessment with a numerical rating scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 3, depending how you want to measure it. We also have seen like goal-based evaluations with measuring percentage completion. And then this can be done through a peer survey or through the performance review, where peers can, they have a numerical scale available to them and they assess the feedback recipient. And finally, a very well, a good model is to use a combination of the previous two. And I definitely have seen this working quite well with a lot of organizations where you combine qualitative and quantitative feedback. So you could do like your goal-based evaluation, and you could have like written responses alongside like percentage completion. And similarly with the feedback survey, you could capture scores, but also you could capture some comments from the person who's providing the feedback or the peer.
So I agree, and I would choose the combination of the two because I consider qualitative feedback to help develop and grow essential soft skills, while the quantitative helps set a direction, take corrective action, and create an alignment between the manager and the employee in terms of expected work outcomes. So a combination of the two will be ideal.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So moving on to our key takeaways, here we're just going to discuss the key points that have come out of our discussion today. And we feel that are really important to remember whilst thinking about how you will be creating your feedback culture. So firstly, a strong organizational culture is built on a strong feedback culture. So not only will a strong feedback culture help, as we discussed, with the various benefits for employees, managers and organizations, but it's also going to help you build an organizational culture that will set you apart from other businesses. Another key point is that we need to practice continuous feedback. Annual performance reviews are almost a thing of the past now, and feedback needs to be continuous, as withholding employee feedback whilst waiting for their quarterly or annual review is going to not help them progress at all. So it needs to be a really continuous cycle. Next, feedback conversations should be collaborative and focus on improvement. We really need to see both top-down and bottom-up feedback conversations where it's a conversation with two participants and it's not just a list of things you need to do, because we found that this approach is really not going to work and that can actually have a counterproductive effect on employees, whereas collaborative conversations will really inspire an employee to take action on their feedback. Another key takeaway is the need to focus on future performance rather than assessing past performance. It's similar to, as I've just mentioned, but an over heavy focus on past performance can also have a counterproductive effect, because it can feel like you are judging the employee on what they've done. Whereas if you take a very futuristic view on what they can do, they are much more likely to take real actions that will get them there and to start achieving their goals. Finally, we think it's a really good idea to use a combination of qualitative and quantitative feedback approaches so that you can measure both soft skills and hard skills at the same time. And why not use a combination when both have really good benefits for business? Any further comments to add there, Nick or Chrissa, as to what we've discussed today?
Yeah, I think this is a good summary of covering all the aspects of feedback. And as we said earlier, continuous feedback is the way to go, because it has to be like a frequent thing that the employee is not afraid to get. And also feedback should be given in a way that helps you improve, not just to tell you what you're doing bad. And as I said earlier, like it's both, it's a coin with two sides. So what I think that my feedback should be for someone, it could be different when I hear things from the other side, from another's perspective. So yeah, collaboration and continuous feedback, I think it's two things that go together when it comes to feedback.
And as a final note, it is very difficult to incorporate a feedback culture if it's something that you have not done in the past, especially for larger organizations. However, we need to see the benefits of a feedback culture and take smaller steps towards incorporating it in our daily, actually, work life, because it will further increase performance, profitability, and engagement between the employee and the organization. So it is a very important topic that companies around the world should pay close attention in order to be effective, even now that remote working is making the workplace even more difficult to handle.
Great stuff. So if you would like to get some more PeopleGoal insights, feel free to download the research slides, check out upcoming and on-demand PeopleGoal webcasts at peoplegoal.com/resources/webcasts. And finally, connect with PeopleGoal on LinkedIn and on Twitter at PeopleGoal. If you would like some further resources on this topic, feel free to check out our blog, where we've covered things like best feedback survey types to boost performance, 5 examples of employee evaluation forms for remote work, and how to encourage feedback from employees. Finally, if you would like to suggest a topic or be a guest in one of our upcoming webcasts, please email me at maddie.o'neill@peoplegoal.com. Thank you very much for listening. It was a pleasure to share our thoughts on feedback culture with all of you.